I'd really like to share with you my favorite journalism joke. To be truthful, it's actually the only journalism joke I know, but I think it's appropriate for book releases too. So here goes. A writer and editor are lost in the desert together. They've been out there for days. Sand in their teeth, their clothes are torn, they're thirsty, they're hungry. They're not sure if they're starting to hallucinate. And as they reach the top of what seems like the millionth sand dune, the writer looks out on the horizon and he's pretty sure he sees an oasis. Oops, that's the wrong way. An oasis. Sees the oasis, he takes off running. The editor's right behind him. They're chasing after each other. Arms are churning. They're kicking up sand. They reach out for the water's edge. And it's not a mirage. The writer plunges his head into the oasis, into the water. He's drinking. He's so relieved. He's starting to feel better. And he notices that the editor isn't sitting next to him anymore. And so he pulls his head up out of the water, and he looks around. And over there on the other bank, he sees the editor. And the FCC is in the room with us here today, so I want to really choose my words carefully. But the editor's got his pants down, and he's peeing into the water. And the writer is just disgusted. He can barely speak. He can barely get it out. He starts screaming, "What are you doing? You're destroying it." And the editor looks back at him and kind of offers a reassuring smile. And he says, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, writer. I'm just making it better. This story says a lot about the relationship between writers and editors, but I also think it speaks to our crisis in journalism, because when we talk about saving the news, first and foremost, let's be sure that we are actually making it better. At this point, it's hard to imagine things could be much worse. By one count, 24,000 journalism jobs have been lost since 2008. Foreign, Washington, and state house bureaus are closing. Major news organizations are in bankruptcy. We've lost some institutions like the Rocky Mountain News. Newspaper circulation is nosediving, and radio and TV seem like they're not too far behind. Our traditional media is in the middle of what I'd call a perfect storm. The rise of the internet, the end of local advertising monopolies have all collided with this economic downturn. But that's not the full story. We also need to recognize that many of the news industry's wounds are self-inflicted. Just a few years ago, newspapers were earning an average 20% profit margin. Some were doing twice as much or more, but when they had those astronomical profits, did they invest in the quality of their products? Did they innovate for the future? In most cases, no. They just bought more newspapers, more TV stations, more local radio stations. And while our regulators in Washington rubber-stamped these mergers, the media companies took on massive amounts of debt, and now they are drowning in it. But here's the dirty secret of the newspaper business. Newspapers are still profitable. Ad Age reported that McClatchy's papers earned a 21% profit margin last year, Gannett 18%. Both still cut thousands and thousands of jobs. I am not saying that the business model isn't in trouble. I'm not saying that all those ads are going to come back. And I'm certainly not saying that the economy is not in bad shape. But if Washington hadn't looked the other way when all those deals went through, newsrooms might have 10 years to experiment, to adjust, to adapt, instead of what now feels like 10 minutes. The last thing that we need now is more of the same bad medicine that got us so sick in the first place. But that's exactly what the industry too often is asking for. Weaker antitrust laws, cross-ownership, more and more and more consolidation and concentration. But doubling down on the bad policies of the past is the wrong thing to do. As my colleague Ben Scott testified in Congress the other day, tying two rocks together won't make them float. Some people out there say we should do nothing. Let them drown. They point out that from the run-up to the Iraq War to the meltdown on Wall Street, the mainstream media have not been doing their jobs. But to me, it's hard to imagine how we'd be better off with fewer journalists on the streets. I believe, and I think many of you do too, that journalism is indispensable in a democratic society. But if the market is failing, we may have to look elsewhere. So what should we do? First, we need to agree on what we're trying to save. This is not just about newspapers. It's about newsrooms and news gathering. This isn't about protecting old institutions or propping up old business models. It's about serving local communities. And it's really about understanding that journalism is a public service. It is not just another business. And the crisis we have in journalism is a national issue that requires a national solution. Just like we need a plan, as Derek outlined, to connect every American to affordable, high-speed internet, we need a strategy to make sure everyone can get quality news and information. That national journalism strategy, I believe, should be guided by the following core principles. First of all, here we go. First of all, we need to protect the First Amendment. Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy and a free society, but we need policies that not only protect free speech, but that also promote free speech. We also need to produce quality coverage. The public needs in-depth news on local, national, and international issues. They need diverse voices and viewpoints. They also need adversarial perspectives. We need to hold the powerful accountable. We need to scrutinize our government. We need to scrutinize our corporate leaders too. And we need to promote public accountability. We need to start treating journalism as that public service, not just as another commodity. Finally, and very importantly, we absolutely must prioritize innovation. We need to utilize the new tools and technology that we have to get journalism to the broadest range of people. Unfortunately, up to this point, much of the debate over the future of journalism has fallen into two camps. On one side, you've got the camp that believes the internet is killing everything good about journalism, and if they're not killing it, they're stealing it. But even if we could put the internet back in the bottle, why would we ever want to? The other camp actually believes the internet will automatically or perhaps magically replace our current model of journalism with something better. But as we've talked about repeatedly this morning, the internet alone won't meet our needs for reasons starting with the fact that 40% of the country doesn't have access to broadband at home. And as our news organizations collapse, it's cold comfort that somebody, someday, sometime, somewhere might come along to replace them. The good news is that there is a fertile middle ground here where we can embrace digital technology and the promise of the internet while also sustaining vital professional journalism. The key question is, what models will provide the institutional and the financial support to keep skilled reporters on the beat? A better question is, how can we put more reporters on even more beats? It's important in this discussion to remember that the news has always been subsidized. Just because advertising no longer subsidizes all of our journalism doesn't mean that we need news any less. So we need new policies to support media. And I hate to break it to some of you, but the government is going to have to be involved. Of course, you might remember that the government has always been involved in media policy. Back in the early days of the Republic, the question was, should we mail all newspapers for free or should we just heavily subsidize them? Today, really, only the technology has changed. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. I think we're going to have to experiment. But I think we do know a few things that will not work. That starts with more media consolidation. More media consolidation is not the answer. I don't believe this is the time for direct government bailouts of Sam Zell or the New York Times. I don't think foundation money alone by itself will do it. I can't endorse paywalls or mandatory micropayments that would cut off content from so much of the audience. Hiding from Google or suing bloggers for using or excerpting your content, that does not count as innovation. In this book, we've chosen or identified 5 policies. Some are short-term, some are long-term, and we believe these show the most promise for addressing the current situation. We start with, We start with new ownership models. We need to start taking the pressure, some of the pressure from Wall Street away, and start reinvesting in serious journalism and in-depth reporting. No profit and low profit models for news organizations could help balance between the public needs and shareholder returns, giving them protections and advantages that the commercial press doesn't have. The nonprofit newspaper bill introduced by Senator Ben Cardin, it's a start, but it's too limited. Its language would largely exclude community newspapers. It would largely leave out much of the ethnic media. And it doesn't offer the same benefits to new media outlets and online news organizations as it would to the old broadsheets. A possible alternative is the low profit, limited liability corporation, easy for me to say, or L3C. That structure, that corporate structure, is now available in a few states, and it gives advantages to corporations committed to a social good and allows them to accept philanthropic support. Newspapers operating as L3Cs or other news organizations operating as L3Cs could still earn a return for investors, but their social purpose would always trump the financial one. We also need to look at new incentives for owners. As the biggest media companies start to collapse around us, they're going to be forced to start selling off properties. Unfortunately, this usually means selling to yet another big conglomerate or a private equity firm that has no ties to the community. Instead, we need to develop a menu of options that would encourage media companies to sell off these properties to new owners who pledge to operate them in the public interest, possibly under a new structure like an L3C. To do that, we need to look at existing bankruptcy and tax laws to encourage local investors, community groups, or employees to take over failing news operations on favorable terms that would keep journalists on the beat and that would have us continue to invest in local news gathering. In the end, I believe that bankruptcy could actually be an opportunity in disguise. If we turn to so-called prepackaged bankruptcies that allow a company to negotiate and vote on reorganization plans before they declare bankruptcy, that could work because they are ideal for still viable businesses that are drowning in debt. Those are businesses like newspapers. So if done right, a failing newspaper could be bought up by a cooperative as employees through a prepackaged bankruptcy, turned into a low-profit or tax-exempt organization, start accepting money from philanthropists, and start testing new ways to generate revenue online, all while still having reporters on the ground reporting and writing. While we're at it, we need to bring back proven policies like the Minority Media Tax Certificate. That was a policy we abandoned in 1995, which gave tax benefits to those who sold media properties to racial and ethnic minorities. When it was in effect, before they abandoned it in 1995, during the time it was in effect, it increased the number of broadcast licenses held by people of color by more than 700%. We need to bring that back. Our third, please, minority. We can clap for special access. We can clap for tax certificates. I want to strongly encourage that. Our third proposal is the Journalism Jobs Program. We want to establish a program to train or retrain young or veteran journalists. We just passed a $1 trillion recovery package, but it's unclear where the reporters are going to come from who should be watching how all that money is spent. So what if instead we took a few thousand AmeriCorps jobs and gave them to news gathering organizations? And why not start retraining veteran journalists, the ones with those deep Rolodexes of sources, in new media skills? Or alternatively, we could put them to work training college students in media literacy. In fact, there's already a pilot program at Stony Brook University doing just that. Another idea is to get the Department of Labor to design a program to keep reporters employed, offsetting the costs that would otherwise go to unemployment and keeping the watchdogs on the beat. Those are the short-term fixes that we propose in the book. For the long term, we're interested in ideas like the Journalism R&D Fund. We believe that just as government invests in medical research to heal the body, we need to start investing in experiments and new models that will heal the body politic. We're calling for the development of a government-seeded innovation fund for journalism, a taxpayer-supported venture capital firm that invests in new journalism models. We propose starting this with a $50 million budget. The fund which could match private and public dollars, would focus on new technology and startup initiatives, especially community-based newsrooms and outlets serving communities of color. Finally, now is the time that we must reimagine our current public broadcasting system and rebuild it as new public media with an overarching commitment to news gathering and community service. This last strategy is crucial. We devote a whole chapter of the book specifically to what we need to do to build a world-class public media system in America. We can look at the numbers. We now spend about $400 million a year in public money on public media. That works out to a whopping $1.35 a person. By comparison, Canada spends $22 per capita, England $80, some of the Scandinavian countries over $100 per person. So imagine what we could do with just a little bit of increased funding. To say as little as $5 per person, we do that and the American public media system could dramatically increase its reach and its relevance. And this money would not just be for journalism. Public media supports arts, education, community service, and who out there wouldn't respond to paying just $5 for better media? I like to think of it this way. Every single person in this room spent $600 to bail out AIG. On those terms, $5 for public media, that's a bargain. Better yet, Congress should really end the dance of annual appropriations. We got to create a permanent trust fund that would permanently remove public media from the political whims of Washington forever. And it's not just about money. We also need to reform the governance structure of public media. We need to utilize new technology. We need to diversify audience and programming. And we need to expand our definition of what public media is. It is PBS and NPR, but it is also low-power FM stations, public access cable channels, and independent websites. One thing that we can do right now, this year, this month, is finally pass the bipartisan Local Community Radio Act that would create hundreds of new community low-power radio stations across the country. This is public media's moment. It's been 40 years, more than 40 years now, since the Carnegie Commission first envisioned the public broadcasting system. This year, we need President Obama to establish a new White House commission to finally bring public media into the 21st century. Leadership at the top is not the only answer here. To save the news, to build our world-class public media, we're going to need broad public participation that's been missing from all of these crucial media debates for far, far too long. Many of our journalists were taught to not even vote, but they're going to have to get involved in politics and policy if they want to keep their jobs. Public broadcasters are going to have to embrace technology, and they're going to have to reconnect with local communities. Bloggers and grassroots media activists, academics, and everyday people who believe that the news should be a little bit more than traffic and weather and sports and whoever got kicked off American Idol last night are going to have to come together and start to build the political will for real change. To make things better, to really make it better, and not like that editor in the desert, we're going to have to pull our heads out of the sand, and we're going to have to get to work. I hope that today we start that truly public conversation about the future of our media, and I, for one, can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.